4T trial that, showed some benefits of moving. And so the neat thing about this is that that's talking about the treatments to do. That's talking about the ART stuff. And so what's gonna be great about her tonight is, learning from from the natural ways of how we can improve our fertility, even beyond that. Cause I feel like when women are older, every little benefit they can get is helpful.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think also when we talk about, hey, let's get a little margin here, let's get a little margin here, those little margins mean more as we get older, as men and women get older. And I'm just really very, very curious and very interested to hear Dr. Jennings' perspectives on kind of the naturopathic, perspective on this. And I'm very excited about this. Yeah.
Well, I was told already by Tasha that we're not allowed to call her a doctor because in Australia they don't call them doctors, and so we have to call her Tasha Jennings. But she'll tell us more about that. I thought that was really interesting when she said that to me. And I really want to make sure people know, and this is really supposed to be an interactive show. Go to tinyurl.com, the SME show, come on live, ask some questions. It's again, you get to talk to someone in the future, so that's pretty impressive. I'll tell you what's going to happen tomorrow on Wednesday, and we'll talk a little about fertility. But let's bring her on. I'm really excited about talking to her. Let me see here. You got it? There we go.
Hello. Hey.
So explain to us again. We can't call you doctor, you said, because even though we have naturopathic doctors in the U.S., you said you don't call them that there, right?
Yes, I guess it's just a term of phrase. I mean, you call them naturopathic doctors, which is probably the same as what it is here, but we're just called naturopaths, and I'm particularly a fertility naturopath. So I always like to make that distinction. I work with some amazing doctors and specialists like yourself, but I'm personally, naturopath.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And we'd love, I think we know, a lot about you. We love your podcast. Many people love your podcast. Would you mind just giving us your 2 cents on yourself? We'd love to kind of hear it from you directly first.
Yeah, look, I'm a fertility naturopath, and I really love helping, proactive women and couples to improve their fertility well-being, to create healthy pregnancies and healthy babies. And I do that through my Your Fertile Pantry group program, which a lot of my success stories have come through, and also my private online consulting. So I've been a naturopath for over 20 years now. Scary. And I'm from the future, so I'm here in Melbourne, Australia, but I love that the technology enables me to see patients from across the globe, as you mentioned off air, that you do as well, which is fantastic. So I work a lot with people like yourselves with IVF clinics, particularly women over 40. So I love our chat today. My most common patient referrals would be from IVF clinics, multiple failed cycles, and then I end up with them then. So I love that we can get on shows like today, and hopefully I can see them before the multiple failed cycles, and we can get some of these things in line and then get success earlier, which is what you spoke about on your podcast the other night as well. Just how do we get the pregnancy outcome at the quickest time frame possible? And so both sides can work together to achieve that for women over 40.
I know in Australia, I mean, a lot of actually IVF embryologists come from there. It's fertility there is huge, and so I'd love to know, what's the difference there compared to the U.S. for our listeners who are listening in on this.
Yeah, I mean, I love speaking with embryologists in regards to the difference in fertility treatments. I guess a lot of the treatments that we're doing are fairly similar in what we do, how it's run, and the rebates and things like that are probably slightly different. But I know you were speaking last night even about the trajectory, whether there's IUI, whether we do Clomid and things like that first. And there's now literature saying that, for women over 40, we probably should jump straight into IVF. And we're following a similar path with that. But the stats on IVF, I don't know what the stats on IVF and female over 40 are in America, but they're rising so much. My patient demographic is getting older, and the amount of people already in IVF when I see them, it's really staggering. Is it the same there?
Yeah, in the US, just to, the quick 2 cents, was a recently published sort of national demographic of data. It's the fastest group of women with their first child or with their first pregnancy is the group of women above 40. So it's rising much, much faster than any other group as well. So it just speaks to this kind of global trend, probably, especially among, more developed countries and everything, where we're seeing more and more people, waiting to get pregnant. So practical experience on the ground as well for Dr. Amos and myself is, I think we see a lot of people above 40, many of who become very successful. So it seems like it's very similar on your side.
And I like to be able to empower these women. I find, especially if they are in IVF, and look, I'm probably generalizing, but I see a lot of type A personalities over 40. They've had careers, they're successful, they're driven, they're goal orientated, and that's how they've become successful. They've set goals, they've achieved them, they've set goals, they've achieved them. And fertility takes that away. You can't just set a goal and achieve it. And I think that's where I see people after multiple failed IVF cycles, because they said, well, this is the answer. We'll just drive you into IVF, we'll do more and more cycles, and you can't stop because you're running out of time. And they're so goal-oriented that they end up, 7-8 cycles later, and they go, what can we do? And that's where there's so much we can do to help these women, because IVF is an amazing technology. I love that we live in the world that's creating pregnancies that may otherwise not have been possible. But it's only as good as the egg and the sperm that you guys, get. And that's something that I often talk about. Building a house, we wouldn't just go in and go, well, yeah, I know it has 4 walls and a floor, and let's get going with this thing. I can, this is hopefully something you're going to live in relatively permanently. You want to get the architect involved. You want to get engineering involved to make sure it's structurally sound. You probably want to make sure it looks great and choose all the fittings. And yet we don't seem to do that with this such valuable time that we have. We're really in the 90 days before we conceive, we're creating these egg and sperm. And that's what I love, to work with women in those 90 days to be able to create that healthy egg and sperm. Because I always say to women over 40, you don't have old eggs. Your eggs aren't even there yet. They're not even eggs. They're these tiny little primordial follicles that haven't grown yet. And what we're seeing now is that it's not so much that your eggs are old, it's that they're developing in an older body. So what can we do to optimize that environment in which they're developing to give you the best chance of creating that healthy egg and sperm that is going to be able to create IVF success or natural pregnancy in some cases?
Do you ever wonder, one of the things that, I struggle with is clearly there's no question that health can affect it, but to a point. Right.
Yeah.
You are born with every egg you're going to have. And we know there's a difference between meiotic and mitotic disorders. And most of the things you're talking about affect the mitotic changes, not the meiotic changes that occurred prior to them, being born. And one of the things that I always try to balance is this feeling that explain them that they can make things better, but also making sure that they don't feel like they are failing. I've seen women who are some of the elite athletes of the world, actually in professional leagues, and their eggs are bad. Same with the men. I've seen Major League Baseball players and stuff, and the sperm is bad, and they're doing everything perfect. And so I'd love to know, how do you talk to patients about this idea that you're trying to maximize what you can do, but you have to still understand that you're still left with, as you mentioned, if you're building a house and you're in Malibu, there's still fires coming through. There's only so much you can do, right? And so there is some limitations. I'd love to understand if you can, tell our listeners and tell everyone, how do you recommend improving things, but still understanding that, yes, there are still some limitations. There are still this inability you cannot overcome because this is what you're born with.
I love that. And I love that you've pointed out those parameters, because age is one of those things. We can't change that. We can't change the eggs that we were born with. We can't change the DNA that we were born with, but we can change the expression of that DNA, or how well it is functioning. I know there was a great study called Feed Your Genes, how your genes respond to the foods that you eat. And they were able to show that within 6 days, there were changes in the way that DNA was functioning. So it's that, as you said, that epigenetics versus our solid DNA. So it's those things we can change, that I can focus on. I think women, I do want to point out, as you said, this is not their fault. They're not doing anything wrong. As I said, the women I see, they're going to the gym in the mornings. They're super healthy. And there's healthy and there's fertility health. So in some cases, marathon runners, elite athletes, people who are super good at their job and go to the gym at 5 a.m. every morning, that's actually maybe not where we need to be for fertility. So it is a slightly different look at things. So definitely the numbers that we can't change, I always go through those. We can't change all of these factors, but I like to look at the numbers we can change. A lot of these women come to me with a whole lot of test results, but they're told everything is fine. Now, as you guys know, fine is such a massive range. And I say, yes, you're fine. You're disease-free. You're healthy. You're okay. There's no problem here. But we're not just talking about keeping your body alive. We're talking about fueling the creation of a new life. And that is going to require everything to be ideally optimal, especially when we in some ways trying to cheat biology, because age does have a huge impact. And I know there was a study I just saw literally came through a couple of months ago that it has an impact beyond just the egg quality issues. It's a huge issue. So we need to, and as you mentioned, Dr. Salem, some of these minor things that we can change can have a bigger impact at over 40. So if we focus on the numbers that we can improve, I think it's very empowering for these women. We're not saying you're doing anything wrong. We're saying here's some things that you can work to improve. It just made me remember, I know there's a book behind me somewhere. I love that book. You probably read it. Professor Robert Jansen, I think, Getting Pregnant. It was back in 1997, I think. It's just an awesome textbook on all the details of getting pregnant. And he showed, if you've got no problems at all or no factors affecting fertility, your chance of getting pregnant in 3 months are, 90%. If you've got one factor affecting fertility, it probably reduces it. But if you've got 2 or 3, it compounds. And I think what I see women over 40 is they're told it's your age, that's it, nothing you can do about it. Super disempowering. And that's one factor. As I've seen patients who, yes, they're over 40, they've got older eggs, they've got low AMH, but, when I've done tests, we've also got thyroid antibodies, we've got a disrupted microbiome. There's other factors that are going to impact their chances that we haven't even been looked at because you're over 40, that's your problem. So I think that's what we need to look at.
Yeah, I like this idea of, issues compounding each other and thinking of it through that framework. And I think that, from our end in medicine, we definitely have that perspective and we address all those factors at the same time. But we also kind of prioritize to some degree. I mean, we sort of could order every lab under, the sun. We could do a laparoscopy and a hysteroscopy for every patient, but we don't. And I suppose what I'm getting at is I'm curious from your end. I mean, this is maybe a very difficult question, but I suppose from your end, let's say hypothetical person, you see them, they're 41 years old and they're planning on doing IVF in a month or 2 or 3. And they come to you and they say, I have the bandwidth to work on 3 things. And I know this is a hypothetical and it's not real and this doesn't fit to any one person, but from a naturopathic medicine framework, where do you start and where do you think about, okay, here are the top few things that we're going to chase, we're going to evaluate, we're going to try to address. How do you think about that?
In my private consultations, I do a massive deep dive. I go way back to their mother's pregnancy because that's when their reproductive system developed. And I go through their, disease history, predispositions, menstrual cycles, all the way through till now. And that gives me a better idea of the life that their eggs have lived. So I can better look at those top 3 things that would be of most benefit to them. If we're generalizing, I mean, there's a lot of information that we can actually help women just, if you focus on these few things, is diet and getting plenty of color. I would say let's focus on what you can get into your body rather than what you have to avoid. Let's get all the good stuff. So I always say antioxidants and phytonutrients, they're just really rich in those colorful foods. So that's a really good one that I find is beneficial for most. I mean, particularly for men, we know lycopene is super important for that sperm health. It's found in seminal fluid. It's really rich in tomato pastes, and it's one of the few nutrients that it's actually enhanced by cooking, by heating. So, you know, the Italians knew what they were doing when they're getting all those reds in the diet. So that's probably one of my top ones that I just say everyone just try doing that, and that can help to improve that antioxidant capacity, because we know antioxidant therapy, you know, there's some studies showing improvement in pregnancy rate by up to 41% depending on the person. So it makes a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about in the United States, at least in the States, and Dr. Sam, I got kicked off here, might come back on. In the States, the way we work with naturopaths is a little bit different, and maybe it is there. You know, some of us, we work hand in hand with naturopaths. You know, I work with them. I know there's others don't work with them as much. How is it in Australia? Do you find that there's a good collaboration between the fertility doctors and the naturopaths?
It's getting a lot better. I've always worked within the medical industry, I have to say, as a naturopath. I used to work in pharmacies. I've always worked with GPs, so it's always felt natural to me. I'm now married to a doctor. He's a cardiologist, heart surgeon, so very different to fertility, but I've always enjoyed that space. But I also always got asked, how are you a naturopath married to a doctor? Don't you hate each other? Don't you? And I still get that from some fertility specialists. They will not see naturopaths. They don't believe in it. I respect that, but I think there's so much evidence these days to show these. It's not I guess it's hippy dippy as it once was thought to be. We've got the evidence to support it, so we can't really put our blinkers on anymore. And there are so many specialists that I love working with here that do cross refer. I love and people are often surprised, why are you sending me to the specialist? Because I'm like, I think we need to, you know, this is going to be the quickest path to get your baby is to go see the specialist. But what we're going to do is I'm going to do the groundwork, because I always say my job is not to get you pregnant. My job is for you to have a healthy baby, and they're two very different things. So when I send someone to an IVF clinic, I want to know that everything is as optimal as possible to be able to get them a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby at the other side. And in some cases, I know I had a 42-year-old, she was sent to me, she had 7 failed IVF cycles and multiple miscarriage over that time. And she was 41 by the time she came to me, but I actually told her to pause, which is a tough thing to do. I actually asked her to pause for 3 months. I think it was nearly 4 months, because when I got her results and when we looked through everything, it wasn't optimal. I said, I don't want to send you back because you're going to get the same outcome as you have been getting. And she was a really poor responder, so always got really low follicle numbers. And we sent her back after doing 3 months of intensive work, and she was great and did everything that we talked through. And she still only got 2 follicles in that egg collection, but 1 turned into a baby and 1 went in the freezer. So we really want to look at that quality over the quantity, and sometimes pausing isn't going backwards, it's moving forwards.
Yeah, here, you're right. I mean, there is that sometimes. It's not even just at the doctor level. So there definitely are going to be doctors who, they're like, oh, I believe in my allopathic medicine. There's nothing else, but it goes the other way too. I've seen it where, I feel sometimes some naturopaths will hold on too long. That's not that common. It happens. But the other thing is patience. I'll see patients sometimes, they really don't want to see a doctor. And they're so stuck to just keeping it as natural as possible that they're waiting too long. I've seen women 4 years with a naturopath trying to get pregnant. It's not working. I'm like, you got to come see like a fertility doctor at that point. I really like the fact that you do that. You look at it as a collaboration. And that's how I look at it too. I tell people, I say, listen, we work together. I said, just like I wouldn't send you to them to do an IUI, I'm not going to do the stuff they do, and like you said, it's all those little things working together that can help. And I think especially when women are over 40, there really is, I don't think it's going to be the make or break, but I think it could be that thing that helps, right? I always like the straw that breaks the camel's back, the thing that helps. I had a patient today. She's 44, 45 years of age, 45. And, I saw this little tiny speck in her uterus. Normally, if someone had like 10 embryos, I'd probably be fine with just transferring an embryo. I'm like, yeah, it's not that bad. But I told her, I said, listen, when it's time to do the transfer, we need to make sure it looks perfect. I'm like, because you're going to get one shot. If we're lucky enough to get one embryo, and she's unique, she has polycystic ovaries, she's probably going to get enough embryos to get one. But I said, but we get one shot at this. And this is exactly where I think you come as, just making sure your inflammatory factors are down, make sure you're taking the antioxidant and all that. So that way, when we try, I can't promise it's going to work. I wish I could, but at least we can all know we did our best. And that little bit, that maybe that 1%, even whatever that amount is still going to help her. And so, really great how you work with the physicians there.
And I love how you said that. It's just those little things that you can empower people with to be able to know that, yes, I can't guarantee a baby. I always say that I can't guarantee. I can guarantee I'm very invested in getting the best outcome for you. And I can guarantee we're going to try everything that we can to get you there. And I think that gives them a real confidence and clarity that these people are wanting, regardless of the outcome at the other end. They've done everything and they know that they gave it the best chance.
Here's on that same note, here's something maybe a little provocative. What's the worst thing a fertility physician can do as they work with a naturopath? I mean, I can think of a few that, come to mind, but,
Great question.
What is the, we're kind of hearing how we should work together. What's the worst scenario that you've seen, or that, you're like, let's please not do this kind of thing?
As in a poor collaboration, or just what I see?
As in a poor collaboration, or like, what are the things to watch out for, or to kind of make sure we don't have, with regards to having a poor collaboration?
Oh, I think to make sure that there's all different types of naturopaths. I always say, look, there are some naturopaths who won't understand IVF is a language of its own, and fertility is a language of its own. So, you don't just look up someone on Google and try to get that collaboration happening with your specialist, because it's possibly not going to work, because they're not going to be able to talk to each other on that same level and that language. So that's probably the biggest thing. And I think that creates further that divide that you were talking about. That creates, that naturopath didn't have a clue what they were talking about. That creates a more divide for the specialist. I think that's what does the damage, where they're not on the same page, they're not speaking the same language. That can cause issues and be detrimental for the patient as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do have some questions that came up. And again, I want people to know that, please feel free to come on and talk. I know Dr. Sam and I look scary, but Tasha's very nice, and she would love to hear questions from you. I'm going to put one up here. One of the first questions we have is, what is Tasha's opinion on vitamin supplements? Are there actually supplements that can optimize someone's fertility?
Great question. And I talk about this on two perspectives, and I go through this in detail in my Your Fertile Pantry program. One of the slides I put up is a woman with a scoop and a whole lot of supplements and just going like this with her mouth. And I see that a lot. Women taking truckloads of supplements because friend, sister, or Facebook or group or YouTube channel, recommended these things. That can be harmful. Taking the right supplements to support you, because I'm all about getting it through diet. But as you mentioned, when we're getting over 40, we may need that little bit more help than we did previously. So supplements can be amazing, and they can really help to support your fertility. But I'll use my car analogy here. I'm like, if I get my car serviced regularly and I take it to a mechanic to get serviced, but personally, I could probably, YouTube a clip. I used to ride a motorbike as a kid and clean out the carburetor. I'm sure I could do a reasonable job with my car, but I don't, because I might stuff it up and my car's really expensive. I really need it. So I take it to get fixed. But people don't seem to do the same with their own bodies. They grab some supplement, throw this in, throw that in. We wouldn't put water in the petrol tank and expect our car to run just because someone said it might be good to clean out the engine. But, we're willing to do that with supplements. So always, yes, there's some amazing supplements that can be really beneficial, but be careful what they are for you. I literally was just on a back and forth with a patient this morning who was on a massive dose of a vitamin they shouldn't be on. And I quickly went, no, please stop that now, reduce that dose back down. So it's really important to get the right dose for you. And also make sure you're not combining. Again, I often look at some people's confusion. I'm like, did you know that there's, zinc in all of these things you're taking? And that's building up to way too much. So great question on the supplement. Yes, they're amazing, but be careful. And also through IVF cycles. I know the specialists that I work with, they know me well enough to go, yeah, just keep taking whatever you're taking from her. But some naturopaths, I've seen them do damage because they're giving them herbs and things that are messing with IVF meds. That's really, go back to your question, Dr. Salem, that's probably the biggest thing I see. I think naturopaths giving supplements that mess with what you guys are doing. And that's the worst thing I see is when they stuff around with the cycle and that throws the hormones out and we're not getting a good outcome because of some poor collaboration.
One person was asking on Instagram about acupuncture. I know, again, as a naturopath, you may not be doing acupuncture yourself, but how do you work with acupuncturists?
I don't know a great deal about acupuncture, I have to say personally. I do have people seeing acupuncturists and working with acupuncturists. So I seem to think it does seem to help with stress levels. And again, that extra thing that they're getting the support around. But I can't comment on the efficacy or how acupuncture works, unfortunately.
Well, absolutely. Do you work with them, though? I think it was more the question I was wondering. Just like we work with you, I know
cross
it kind of
referrals
falls into that, non-allopathic medicine type of way of looking at things. And as you mentioned, I've worked with naturopaths that use herbs as well, like Chinese medicine as well. Very neat. Do you ever use one I hear about, it's more from the acupuncturist, is red light therapy. Do you use that as a naturopath?
Personally, I don't, but I have seen patients use that and seem to be getting reasonable results from what I'm reviewing in the literature. So that does seem to be a nice adjunct to the therapy we're doing. I think that's what I see at acupuncturists as well. And often what they're doing is I will often call them and make sure what we're doing is complementing each other, same as what we do with a specialist. We'll often communicate and make sure, and I think that's the biggest thing about the collaboration, is make sure any herbs or anything that I'm using are working in with anything the acupuncturist is using or vice versa. I think my role is to really support that egg quality and create a nice healthy home for that uterine environment, because that's the other side of the coin. It's not just about that egg and sperm and embryo. It's obviously super important. We need to create that nice receptive environment, as you were saying as well. But egg quality over 40 is probably the biggest thing. It does decline. Unfortunately, it's declining as we're sitting here. We can't help that, but we can help to reverse that process. And there's probably 5 key things that I'll touch on for people to focus on, and probably even relates back to your question, what they can do. There's 5 things I focus on. Number 1 is energy. The egg cell has more mitochondria than any other cell in the body. It's absolutely phenomenal what it can do, and it takes a ton of energy to be able to do that. And as you know, the egg cell actually carries all of the growth and development from that time that fertilized all the way through to day 3. Like that, the egg is doing all of that growth and development. And when I guess as we're older, we just don't have that energy capacity. So what I want to do is work with women to help to fuel that mitochondrial energy, as you were saying, Dr. Amos, reducing inflammation, anything that's drawing from that energy, and improve the capacity of those mitochondria to function better and more effectively. And we also, on the flip side, want to work with the male, because I'm often seeing his results are fine. But, the egg cell, again, an amazing, human cell, it can actually, fix issues in sperm and go on to create a pregnancy, because it has that ability to do that. So no pressure on men, but we just don't want fine. We want Olympic athlete sperm. If we're working with older eggs, we want absolutely perfect sperm. We've got a much better chance of creating a pregnancy out of an Olympic athlete swimmer, a perfect sperm, and an okay average egg than we have if they're both on the lower average side. So energy is super important. The other thing is DNA creation, like using the nutrients that are foundational to support that creation of DNA. So we know our folates, our choline, our B12s, even our proteins, looking at what we're getting to provide those building blocks of that DNA. Then particularly as we get older, number 3 is your antioxidants. So we want to protect that process. It's highly vulnerable to external influences. And again, we're not just talking about keeping us healthy. We're talking about, even environmental toxins and things that can affect such a small, tiny thing that's going to be looked at under a microscope. So we want those antioxidants within the seminal fluid, within the follicular fluid, to be able to protect the developing egg and sperm. And then we also want to look at the health of that cell. So often say it's the same raw materials, like you can get grapes and sultanas, and same stuff, but they look very different. So we want to make sure, has it got that nice healthy cell wall with the spindle looking really that functioning well? How healthy is that cell? And that's what, even with IVF, a failed cycle I never say is a wasted cycle. It's an information tool. We never get to look at egg and sperm. I would love to be able to microscope and look in and see the egg and see them getting better, but we can't do that. But IVF can. So let's gain as much information as we can. So we want to look at that cellular health. And the last thing that we want to look at is the environment. So internal and external environment. What are we exposing ourselves to that may have an impact? So I know there's some great studies looking at BPAs and things. And yes, they are excreted out of your system within 2 weeks, but we don't know at what developmental stage that egg or sperm may have been at, that these toxins may have irreversible effects depending on what stage of development it's at. So they're 5 key things that I think if we can look at those and keep that in mind, they're the things we can improve.
Yeah, that's just a great kind of overview of how to think about this, how to think about, these things, and these processes obviously don't happen overnight. I mean, how do you perceive kind of the long-term impacts of what people have done over the course of their life over kind of the short-term, impact of having these things? And obviously there's no way to know perfectly, but how do you talk to people about that? Because I think that's a hard thing that we come across is well, I never thought about these things, and then all of a sudden I'm going to think about all these things all at once right now, right before IVF. And how do you reconcile those things?
Great question, because I'll often get people come to me. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize it was an issue. I used to binge drink. I used to smoke. I used to, lots of people, it's, you have your teen years and your 20s and that's what you do. And then all of a sudden you realize you're like, oh my gosh, have I done huge damage here? I think it's what you're asking a lot of people do. I've been smoking. Is that caused huge damage? And look, in some ways, to a certain extent, it may have, but it's, again, something that we can't change the past, but we can change. And if we're going to look at a long time frame, I always look at those 90 days, because that's when, we're going from that primordial follicle to that hopefully mature egg that's, going to have the potential to create a baby. So if we can help to optimize the environment within that time frame, and we know, for example, smoking. If men quit smoking, we have a huge impact. I know there was a study showing that it impacted maternal age by adding 10 years. So if you're smoking, just stop. And that can be reversed, the impact of those cigarette smokes, because we can up the antioxidants, we can clear out those pathways, we can have that egg developing in that environment that is now smoke-free. So that is a similar thing, what I'd look at past behavior or past poor health or things that may be impacting their fertility. Yes, we can help to reverse some of those things by making proactive, positive changes. And it also doesn't mean you need to go live in a Zen tent or in the Himalayas to be toxin free. Obviously, that's not conducive to the way life is at the moment. So it's about optimizing, looking at those 5 key aspects and how you can incorporate things into your life. And that's why I put together the Your Fertile Pantry program, to help people just to make it easier to be able to implement some of these strategies, so that they can not feel that they've done a ton of damage or they have to do everything perfectly. Because I'll go the other extreme. I've also had patients coming to me. I had one patient who was eating nothing but everything in a barcode. She was so obsessed with label reading and knowing what was in things. another one that was almost, I think she was just eating almost lettuce leaves all it, and nothing, or yeah, everything was totally organic, and it was so stressful. So I don't want you to think you have to take it to that extreme. I've actually said to some people, go and eat some bread. You know, it's fine for you, your sister's friend, and that they may have got pregnant by avoiding gluten, and that was good for them, but it's not affecting you. So please enjoy yourself. So I think it depends on the person. I think knowing that, having a look at your blood tests, and often, as you mentioned, Dr. Salem, it doesn't mean going and testing everything. A lot of the time, I'm just telling women to get a copy of your results, have a look at your results, empower yourself, and see, are my results optimal? I'm told they were fine, but actually, I'm now seeing, based on your reference ranges, they're not optimal. So they can then empower themselves to make those proactive changes without having to, be too stressful about that, because Facebook groups can be a nightmare. I don't know if you follow a few. I've had to pull myself out sometimes.
You know, you hit on a topic that I talk about too when I talk to patients about, let's say, doing a diet. I tend to, for certain patients during the stimulation, I have them do a low carb diet. You bring up the part about 90 days, and you're correct. There are things that impact the egg, but there's also environmental things, right? So we know even if you've done all those things for 90 days, if during the stimulation you have high inflammatory factors at that point, that's also going to affect the embryo quality and stuff. But what I tell them is, I don't tell them for 90 days to try to do this diet strict. I say, listen, here's what I want you to do. It's always great to do low carbs, but during this 2 weeks, I really want you to focus on, because I know anyone can do anything for 2 weeks, but it's almost impossible to do it extreme for 90 days or 180 days or whatever. And I think it's great how you said that, where, do it to the level you can do. Don't do it to where you're being miserable, because that's going to create other stresses in your life. And
definitely.
You brought up something, and I was one of the questions that came up that someone asked was, they said, for you, just so they can understand the workup that you do as a naturopath, what type of workup, such as labs or others, do you look at from a naturopath perspective to try to improve on? I would love to hear that. Like, what is that workup that you do compared to us? Because we do the typical workup, but would love to hear what you do. I know a lot of it's the same blood work, but I think they'd like to hear that.
Yeah, look, a lot of it is the same, just looking at a little bit more nuanced. And then if I am seeing them privately and do that deep dive, there may be some more specific factors that come up just because of what they've told me in their history. But definitely some basic ones you want to look at. You want to look at your iron studies. You want to look at your vitamin B12 and your active B12, because they're really important in developing that DNA. So how well you're actually metabolizing your B12. Another one that some of all the doctors that I now work with do it, but fasting homocysteine. That's an indicator of methylation and how well you're metabolizing your folate. I like to see that between a 5 and an 8. It really should be at a really healthy level. That means, because methylation, as you know, is so important, as you mentioned, in those embryo development stages and also egg quality. So they're key ones. Vitamin D has been linked to low AMH and poor fertility outcomes. I'm quoting Australian reference ranges too. I'm not sure how it correlates, but in Australia, it's about 100. We want to see a level of vitamin D or over 100. And then there's, I guess, other markers that I may look at depending on the person, whether they have any inflammatory markers, whether we need to look at their ESR and CRP, whether that is an issue. We may want to do an FBE, like a full blood examination, to check on things there. Often cholesterol, funnily enough, with PCOS and men. Obviously, it impacts sperm health, particularly PCOS women. I've seen really healthy-looking, slim women have that high cholesterol. So that's another one. Obviously, a hormone that's linked there. And then look, for some other women, I often will check, particularly for endometriosis patients or that high estrogen picture, histamine can be a big marker, and that's pro-inflammatory. And we're not talking about histamine levels that are, massive. They won't come up high on a blood test, but they'll come up higher than I would like to see them. And then that's often a chronic issue that's driving inflammation, and symptoms may, show as more a neurotransmitter issue like anxiety and the issues that they may not relate to the histamine. So there are a few that and then potentially their ANA if they've, these multiple miscarriage. They're probably some basic I look at for most people. Thyroid, we want that TSH obviously below 2.5. I also like to look at the T3, T4. I like to see the T4 probably around a 19 if that's a similar reference range. Sometimes reverse T3 if the person has an issue. And for example, thyroid antibodies is one I looked at in a patient recently. She'd been trying for like 3 years, and doing her workup, I'm like, has anyone tested your thyroid antibodies? She had, an issue with her thyroid. There was nodules, and yes, we've now found that there's thyroid antibodies as an issue. And this was someone who was going to be put on Zoladex because they thought that was her issue, and they're going to do a 3-month course and they get all this. I'm like, let's look at everything else before we go down that extreme path. So there's some of the things that I generally see, and a lot of the specialists, in all credit, are doing these tests now, which is fantastic. So I'm often just collating them and looking through them and sorting out what needs to be repeated or what's not optimal.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It really is the same workup, and that's what I've seen too. It does seem a little bit more thorough. I think part of it's just the way people practice medicine. Some, do all the tests. Some will just do them and then piecemeal it. But yeah, it's almost the same test I see, and I agree. That's what I've seen in my experience as well. I think the way we go about it is a little bit different too. I know, like for me, I'm in that allopathic guy of mine. Just I start thinking treatment right away and adding those on at the same time. Whereas I'll see like my naturopaths, they'll start with things first. They'll start with a lot of time intercourse, things like that first, before recommending things to try and improve sperm. One of the things that came up, and I don't know if the person understood, they asked, what was an oocyte? How is this different than CoQ10? So I don't think they understood oocyte's just another term for egg. And so I was going to point that out. For us, I mean, two of the ones I will recommend is CoQ10 and DHEA. And there's some studies out there, obviously, on those that have shown some benefit. And there's some studies out there and some other ones. But one of the things I see, and I'm sure you heard of this book because everyone throws it out as it starts with the egg. With that, I've actually read that book. And one of the things I didn't like about it was a lot of bench research type of things are being said that it's going to help people versus clinical, right? So in the laboratory, we may see something, but it doesn't mean it's always going to happen clinically. And so what other, supplements other than CoQ10, DHA that you feel are like they absolutely need to take? Obviously, we know vitamin D is low. You got to take vitamin D. Things like that have to be brought back to normal. But I'm saying things that you wouldn't normally take, like CoQ10, DHA. What other things would you recommend?
Particularly over 40, CoQ10 definitely. And I don't know if they were asking about ubiquinol. Some of that is ubiquinol the same as CoQ10. Ubiquinol is a form of CoQ10, and that's the one I prefer. It's actually better absorbed. And that again works on that mitochondrial energy that we were talking about initially. That's my number one. We need to fuel that energy. So that works on that energy. So CoQ10 is definitely one. Funny enough, the old-fashioned vitamin C is underrated. Fantastic antioxidant, super cheap, super effective. It's found in seminal fluid, in follicular fluid. It's a great antioxidant. So vitamin C is one I'll often just get them to just take in the background. We also lose it every few hours, often like a powder or one of those chewables you can take a few times a day. It's excellent. Vitamin D, as you said, we need that to be at a good, healthy level, not just above benchmark. So we want to be supporting their vitamin D levels. B12 is another one I do like to have at a reasonably good high level. I love to see active B12 probably over 100. And even their B12, around 500 to 600, which is right. It's more the upper limit of that B12. So we want plenty of that in there because that's really easy to absorb and great for improving that fertility as well. Like some of the other newer supplements you'll see out there, like the NAD boosters and the nicotinamide riboside, chloride, they are showing some promise. There's NMN as well. Again, they're working on that mitochondrial energy. I have seen them provide some benefits, and particularly as we're getting older, they are things that I would probably look at with most patients. Resveratrol has some decent literature behind it in regards to its antioxidant capacity. Again, getting it in the right form and the right dose is really important for resveratrol. In some supplements, it will do very, very little. Lipoic acid has some decent things around it. Oh, and omega-3s were probably another, like your vitamin C. Omega-3s are fantastic. The DHA, the head of sperm, is really rich in DHA. So we want to like bump up that DHA, because I mean, the number one thing that men are having problems with is head defects. I think whenever I see a semen analysis, it's 99% head defects. So we want to be antioxidant protecting that head, and also supporting the DHA. And also that is one thing that has been proven to help to reverse the aging impact on women's eggs is omega-3s. So really simple, boosting that in your diet, but perhaps supplementing on a good quality omega-3 where you can as well. So there's some great ones to start with.
With men, and there's definitely lots of evidence out there that, as you said, when women's eggs are healthier, they can fix some of the problems in the male sperm. As women get older, it has less ability to do that. That's where these supplements come in and help that. There's data out there showing older men with younger women have better chances because of this reason. Yeah. So for men, especially when they're in these relationships where their partner is older, it really does benefit them to have better sperm. There are some studies that came out a while ago saying that the supplements may not be helping men as much. Now, I think the thought process on that was, men make millions and millions of sperm. So if you're only using 10 sperm, right, even if you improve the quality by 20%, you still have enough sperm to begin with anyways if you're doing IVF. But, I still think there are times that was looking at everyone in general. For a guy, if he wanted to help improve, his partner chances by improving their sperm value, what would you recommend for them? I'd love to hear that as well.
I definitely think the partner needs to be looked at and needs to be looking at their diet, looking at their lifestyle, looking at their supplements. It's so important because, as you said, there was that old theory that they have tons of them, so it doesn't really matter. And yes, in a way it doesn't. And people say, well, we'll just do ICSI. But, the evidence of ICSI in older eggs is not great. We actually, ideally, if we can get the natural IVF happening, we get better outcomes. It's showing in the literature. So we can get the better quality sperm. And also, it depends on, when I look at a semen analysis, I'm often told everything is fine because, okay, well, you've got 6% normal swimmers. But then when I look at the volume, that's quite low as well. So definitely look at sperm health. Super, super important. So things they can do, vitamin C is fantastic. Vitamin C is found in seminal fluid. It helps to protect that swimmer as it's being developed. We also want to minimize toxins. Literally, just because of where the factory is located, they're quite vulnerable to external exposures. We don't want to get them overheated. The old adage of cycling, not going to say they can't ride a bike, but don't get them overheated. Don't expose yourselves to tons of fragrance and those Lynx deodorants that you spray everywhere. Just minimize your toxic load. If you want to look at some supplements, your vitamin C's, zinc perhaps can be helpful. I don't give that to everyone. I always check their levels, but zinc can be supportive. Vitamin E is also another one that has been proven to have some benefits. Omega-3, as I mentioned, for both that egg quality and that DHA, and particularly DHA, the DHA component of the omega-3 is really rich in that head of sperm. So I always look at that for men as well. And then there are more specific things if we want to look at, what is it for them? Is it their motility that's on the slow side? Is it their morphology, which is one of the primary things I find? Or, are they not swimming in the right direction? So CoQ10 is another one that's going to be supportive of that energy, and it's also an antioxidant as well, and it's also going to support sperm health the same way it does that mitochondrial energy in the egg. They're probably the foundational ones that I would look at for men, and then I guess you get more nuanced if, that we've shown that they've had high cholesterol. High cholesterol and diabetes are two things I always look at, or not necessarily even diabetes, but they're markers of sugar, because we know that high sugars or dysregulated sugar affects egg and sperm health. And a lot of people have dysregulated sugar. So we want to be looking at that. We want to be looking at their metabolic factors. So be supporting that metabolic health in general as well for both partners. So that's where, even your alpha lipoics, inositol can be excellent. Inositol helps to balance that blood sugar. Also really good for thyroid antibodies. And selenium is probably the other one that does have a lot of research around it in regards to sperm health as well. But again, make sure you're taking the right dose, the right levels, because these things can be toxic if we take too much of them.
Well, I know I have a couple questions here. One of the one that keeps coming up I see is about
Mm.
MTHFR. This is one I've
Yep.
been seeing both in our Instagram, and Jen here actually has a lot of questions. I actually recommend her coming on to the show because I think she just has a ton of questions for you that are great questions. And one of them is, how does MTHFR gene mutation impact fertility? I love that. I love this gene just because I love to say the mother effort gene. I always think that's the best title for this gene. And one of the other questions that came up from the Instagram was, with people with one chromosomal error, and I'm assuming they're saying the A version versus the C version, is how does it affect their chances? And you brought this up earlier about the homocysteine, but I think it'd be great if you want to answer that, and we can also give our our version of it too. But what do you do with that?
Great question. And I love talking about this gene because I'm often told, I get people coming to me, and look, sometimes great, they've been tested by their specialist and they come in, I've got the gene, I've got this genetic defect. I'm like, and I often put up, when I'm talking about this gene in presentations, I'll put up a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle slide, which is probably my son was about 10 at the time and really into Ninja Turtles. So I'm like, this is not a mutant gene, because they call it a mutation. So people think I'm a mutant. I have this mutant gene. I'm a defect. I can't get pregnant because I have this defected gene. I can't change my genes. It's irreversible. So I get people so freaked out coming to me. First of all, there are 4 different variants of this gene, as you mentioned. So it depends whether you have your I'm not sure if the testing is written the same, but for us, it's 677 and 1298 are the 2 variants that we check. And so you can be heterozygous for one of them, or heterozygous for both of them, or you can be homozygous for one or homozygous for both. You can't be homozygous for both, not conducive to life. That will never be the case. But the 1298 is probably the less impact than the 677. So some of these people that come to me freaked out are heterozygous for 1298. Now that has, to be honest, very little impact on fertility. So something good to be mindful of, good to support, but has very little impact. So don't get freaked out about that. If we have the 677 and perhaps we have heterozygous for both, that's when I will look at homocysteine and making sure that's at a good level. I will support their activated B12s and their cholines and their folates, because we know methylation is really important for those early stages of embryo development. But I also like to look at the gene. I call the gene a spelling, like the gene is like a spelling mistake. It's a spelling mistake in the RNA code at points 1298 or 677. And like with any spelling mistake, we might be corresponding by email. I send you an email and I might have spelling mistakes in that email, but we've been talking back and forth. You read the email, totally fine, get it. But let's say we hadn't corresponded for a few months. You'd had a really long day. I might send that same email with those spelling mistakes, and you go, hang on, Tasha, what do you mean by that? And that's where we want to do with that gene. We know you have this spelling mistake in the gene. So how can we optimize that environment so that gene still, because what the gene does is it provides the code for the enzyme. So it's coding for the enzyme. So we want it to code correctly. We want it to work correctly and support that folate metabolism. So we just want to put it in a really nice environment. We want to supply the extra choline it might need. We want to supply the activated folate that you might need and support that gene. It's really just your Achilles heel. As long as we know about it, we can support it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, most of the patients now, I recommend them just being on the prenatal vitamin with methylated folate. And again, same thing, check a homocysteine level as well. When it comes to diets, any type of diet you recommend? I mean, a lot of times I'll tell people low carb, Mediterranean. Is there anything that you recommend for diets for people who are going through fertility?
Absolutely. And in my Your Fertile Pantry program, I go through 6 modules and talk about fertile carbs, fertile fats, and how they can look at those, which is, I guess, really empowering for them to be able to know what to eat. Because yes, there's great evidence around the Mediterranean diet, which I love, but then some people don't love those foods. So I try to teach them how to eat with foods that they love by using those principles. So the main principle, a really important principle to keep in mind, is we don't need to necessarily stop all sugar, but we want to make sure that if we are having sugar, we're having it with fat, fiber, or protein. We want to lower that glycemic index. We don't want those troughs and spikes. And that's where low carb can be beneficial. And particularly around, as you said, that implantation window. So in general with diet, I would look at their sugars. I would go with loads of color. I would go with a Mediterranean style diet, which really just means lots of olive oils, fish, healthy fats that we talked about how important they are for egg and for sperm health. They've already got that lovely color in there. They're really rich with the lycopenes, so the reds. But I also, in my program, I give people literally a chart, and it's like a kid's chart. Look at purple, look at yellow, look at red, try to inject those colors. We tend to be a bit narrow in our focus when we're having colors. So they're probably key things that are going to help people across the board. And then there's obviously nuances. If they do have thyroid antibodies, or there is ANA, or there is immune activation, I would probably go gluten-free because that is going to have a huge impact. But as I've mentioned, there are some people who are really painfully going gluten-free when it's not impacting them a great deal. So maybe we could relax a bit more and enjoy yourself on that level.
So if I understand, then eat the red and the purple M&Ms. Those are going to be
healthy. Oh,
for me.
definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
The red and the purple
sure
M&Ms are the best.
I know we're getting near the end here, and I definitely want to give you a chance also to tell everyone, how to see some of the material you have. You mentioned something about having a course. Before we jump, that's coming up, I think you said it's like 2 a.m. our time, but I definitely want to hear about that. Just one more thing I wanted to go over. I'm sure Dr. Sadler has one because I've been asked questions. Epigenetics. So this is something that I think it was just recently, there was an article came out in one of the medical journals about even doing marijuana, like back when you're younger for a period of time, lasts a lifetime in your epigenetic. Now, we used to think it was like, oh, you stop it, it goes away. And not specifically marijuana when I'm talking about it, but how do we get to younger people to let them know that, hey, some of these things may never go away? As you mentioned,
smoking, you're speaking my language.
Yeah, how do we get this out to younger people that, find out where you're at, because if you're starting with a great ovarian reserve, you might be able to get away with some bad years and stuff, but there's some people who just their baseline is low. And so anyways, I'd love to hear how you get out to people. We try to do shows like this, educational, to get this out to people that, these choices do have long lasting effects sometimes. And like you said, in the end, you can't change it, but you try to do what you can later on in life.
I think this should be taught in schools or at a much earlier age. I think the message, I know certainly I don't know with you, when I was at school, it was don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant, don't get pregnant. And so the flip side is, well, look, I'm going to get easily pregnant when I want to, because obviously they're, hammering down this message. And I think, as you said, there are some things, and as I said, when I do a workout with patients, I will factor those in and go, oh gosh, that happened when they were doing that at 15 or whatever. I'm like, okay, I can't change that. So we've got to, how do we work around that? So I think things like speaking at these talks, that's how my podcast came about, to be honest. I just started diving into my own research because we had our own fertility issues, which really almost astounded me. I'm super healthy. I'm a naturopath married to a doctor. What's happening? And so I reached out to specialists from, New York to Italy to Adelaide, and I was just heartened by what they were sharing. And I, wanted to share that information more. So I think I love what you're doing with this show. That's how I wanted to share this information. So I started the Conceive Baby Podcast, where I interview specialists about this type of research that I'm only seeing in medical journals that I think should be out to the world more as well, which is really important. And I think getting the message across that I spoke to a couple just this week, actually, who came to me and I said, okay, well, we'll go through your presenting issues. And they're like, oh, we haven't started trying yet. We just want to get ready. I'm like, oh, yay. I would love everyone to know that, like, we'll go back to that building the house analogy. We don't just like go in there and know that it has a floor and walls and windows and I can do this. You want to get this right. This is something that is going to be permanent, and you are creating life. There is a opportunity in that. That we have this opportunity to pass on. As you said, some of these things are foundational that were from our grandmas. That's how much our eggs affect us. Our grandma's eggs affected us. So if we can help support that generational impact on the DNA, I think it's a huge opportunity that we have. So start early and speak to someone like myself, or get to a fertility specialist, get the workup done to actually know where you stand and improve that before you fall pregnant. And I think not even opportunity, I almost believe it's a responsibility. There is something magical and empowering about creating a new life. And I think we need to do the groundwork to, as you said, this should be taught earlier so people are aware that these things I'm doing now may be affecting my future baby. So, what do I want to do about that? So hopefully shows like this can reach more people and we can get to that younger generation and who may be more conscious of their fertility longer term.
That's a wonderful message. And, I think in the back of my mind, the thing that I was going to ask you about, you already answered it, which is, we've been talking a lot about fertility and getting pregnant, but for a lot of people, everything that you're talking about is so critical for staying pregnant and having, more importantly, a very healthy pregnancy. And I talk to people all the time about, the importance of Mediterranean diet, these, the green and the red M&Ms and, everything that goes along with that. But, I just think it's so critical to be launching your pregnancy at the healthiest version of you that you can realistically, have. Now, I'm also extremely thankful that men don't have to take on pregnancy right now because, I don't know, Dr. Amos and I try our best, but sometimes we don't make the best food choices. We go out to eat at restaurants every once in a while. And so endlessly impressed by all our patients. That's the note I want to leave it on, is like, I am so impressed and sort of, motivated in many ways by all our patients who come through, all these women who come through, who dramatically, change their life and make really, really big improvements. Working with people like you, Tasha, I'm just, so impressed by it all. And so thank you again for your perspective and for everything that you do and for spreading the good word on this.
So Dr. Saber, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'd love to I've talked a lot about the 90 days and people think, I have to do it for the whole time. And I think I love that study that I referred to earlier, that it took just 6 days to change that gene expression with changes in diet. So we can have a positive impact relatively quickly. This is not something that is necessarily, a ball and chain.
Yeah.
So Dr. Sam, when you see the med list for the guys and you see there's 12 supplements on there, are you thinking they did it for the girl, or you think she might have something to get him to do those?
I think 99 times out of 100, she's like, you're taking these supplements, and that's exactly that story. Yeah.
That's something that translates across the globe.
Well, Tasha, it's been really a great time. Let's finish this off by you telling everyone just a little bit about where they can learn about you, your podcast, and again, you said you're doing a free seminars coming up here. Awkward time for us, but still, people might want to get to it.
Yeah, look, I have a free workshop coming up, which I do have people from all over the globe join. I love it when people tell me it's 1 a.m. or it's 3 a.m. It's going to be 2 a.m. your time. It's actually 7 p.m. Thursday, which is Thursday night here, but that's actually, I'm from the future, so it's your Thursday morning at 2 a.m. But that's something that's totally free. And that small investment that you can make in getting up early and learning how to improve your fertility can make a ton of difference. I know my son and husband get up at all hours to watch the Premier League in London from Melbourne. So I would love to see anyone there. And that's totally free. I talk through particularly those 5 key factors. I deep dive further into what you can do to help to support egg quality, looking at those 5 key factors. And that's, at tashajennings.com.au/workshop. So if they want to head to that link, tashajennings.com.au/workshop, that's totally free for them to join. I also have probably would benefit them as well as the Fertility Over 40 guide. So at tashajennings.com.au/fertility over 40. There's just a guide where I go through probably some of the key factors that we've touched on today that they can, make changes today.
Well, I greatly appreciate that you're offering that. We really appreciate it. Dr. Sam, anything else you have to add, or?
Nothing else. Thank you so much for coming on to this morning in Australia. And
this morning, this evening for you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. And I look forward to talking to you. I'd love to, like I said, have you on my podcast and vice versa. And we could just keep educating people. So
I look forward to having you guys on the Conceive Baby podcast as well.
Perfect. You have a great night. Well, great late morning.